The dust hung thick in the air at Forward Operating Base Kushamond, kicked up by boots and bad attitudes. It was August 2012, the kind of Afghan heat that turned body armor into a personal sauna, and Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves had just crossed the obstacle course finish line dead last. Again, she stood there in full kit, 70 pounds of gear, rifle, helmet, the works, hands on her knees, chest heaving, while 30 service members watched her fail. The whispers started before she'd even caught her breath. Infantry guys, combat engineers, a handful of Marine Corps advisors who'd been rotating through the FOB for the inter-unit training exercise. They weren't trying to be quiet about it. How the hell did she make E6? Army's lowering standards. Man, that's how. Maya straightened up slowly, deliberately ignoring the looks. She was 29 years old, small-framed, maybe 5'4" on a good day. Next to the 6-foot pipe hitters around her, she looked like someone's kid sister who'd wandered onto the wrong base. Her uniform was soaked through with sweat. Dust caked her boots. And that rope climb, the one she'd fallen from twice before finally just walking away from it, had left her hands raw and bleeding through her gloves. Staff Sergeant Kyle Briggs, a Marine with a chest full of ribbons and an ego twice as big, didn't even bother lowering his voice. A waste of a uniform, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Seriously, what's she even doing out here? Laughter rippled through the group. Not all of them. Some just looked uncomfortable, stared at their boots. But enough. Enough to make it sting. This wasn't just embarrassment. In a culture that measured worth in pull-ups and ruck times, and who could carry the most weight the farthest distance, Maya Reeves had just publicly failed the test that mattered. Physical prowess was currency here, and she was bankrupt. She unclipped her helmet, pulled it off. Her dark hair was plastered to her scalp. She didn't look angry, didn't look ashamed, either. There was something else in her eyes, something harder to name. A weary frustration. The look of someone who'd been through this pattern before and knew exactly how it would play out. Captain Morrison, her company commander, was waiting for her at the edge of the course. He was a decent guy, generally. A former ranger who'd been riding a desk for the last 2 years and didn't love it. But right now, his jaw was tight and his voice had that clipped tone officers use when they were trying not to lose their temper in front of enlisted. Reeves, walk with me. She followed him away from the crowd, away from the snickering and the side eyes. They stopped near a Humvee parked in the shade of a concrete blast wall. Morrison crossed his arms, looked at her like he was trying to solve a problem he didn't want to deal with. You're making the unit look weak, he said finally. No preamble, just the truth, delivered flat. I get that you're intel. I get that you're not infantry. But you're wearing the same uniform as everyone else out here. And when you can't keep up physically, it reflects on all of us. Maya said nothing, just stood there, holding her helmet, waiting for the rest of it. Maybe this deployment isn't the right fit, Morrison continued. His tones softened slightly, like he was trying to be reasonable. There's good intel work stateside. Behind a desk. Climate-controlled. No obstacle courses. He paused. No one judging you for things that aren't your job. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Maya met his eyes. For a moment, it looked like she might say something. Something that would explain why his assessment was so desperately, fundamentally wrong. But she didn't. She just nodded once, barely perceptible, and put her helmet back on. Understood, sir. Morrison watched her walk away, back toward the barracks, alone. He didn't know what he'd just done. Didn't know who he was looking at. None of them did. And that was the problem. What nobody at FOB Kushamond knew, what they couldn't know, because it wasn't in any file they had clearance to read, was that Maya Reeves hadn't come up through a traditional military path. She'd been recruited out of a PhD program at Georgetown in the fall of 2001, 3 weeks after the towers fell. 21 years old, fluent in Arabic, halfway through a dissertation on Pashtun tribal governance that suddenly became the most relevant research in America. A man in a suit had shown up at her apartment with a business card that said Department of Defense and nothing else. He'd asked her one question: do you want to actually help, or do you want to write about it? She'd signed the papers by December. 2 years at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. Pashto first, Then Dari. Not classroom fluency. The kind of fluency where you could argue about dowries with a village elder or recognize which valley someone grew up in by the way they pronounce certain vowels. Then came the fast track into human intelligence operations. The kind of work where your performance reviews were classified and your duty stations were listed as various locations. CENTCOM AOR. 4-5 years before this posting, Maya had worked in roles that didn't have clear names. Other government agency liaison, embedded cultural advisor, human terrain specialist. The kind of assignments where you wore local clothes more often than a uniform, where you sat in Afghan homes drinking tea and listening to men talk about which of their cousins were working with the Taliban and which ones just needed cash for a wedding. She'd spent more time in rural Helmand and Kuna provinces than most infantry officers ever would. She'd mapped tribal networks that saved entire platoons from walking into ambushes. She'd identified high-value targets by recognizing family connections that signals intelligence would never catch. But none of that showed up on a fitness scorecard. While her peers back at Fort Bragg were perfecting their bench press and shaving seconds off their 2-mile run times, Maya had been perfecting the art of reading micro-expressions during interrogations, learning which questions to ask and which ones got people killed, memoizing the names of subclans and rivals and blood feuds that went back 3 generations. That was her training. That was her warfight. Her body carried the wrong kind of scars for this environment. A stress fracture in her left foot from a vehicle rollover outside Kandahar during a source meeting that went sideways. She'd walked on it for 6 hours to get back to friendly lines because calling for an extract would have blown her cover. Recurring shoulder pain from being shoved against a stone wall by a hostile informant who'd figured out she wasn't just another NGO worker. She had close-quarters pistol training, tactical combat casualty care, survival, and evasion qualifications that most soldiers never touched. But she wasn't built for rucking 70 pounds over a 10-mile course in August heat. Her cardiovascular system was fine. Her mental toughness was unquestionable. She just didn't have the frame, the muscle mass, the body type that thrived in that particular test. And in a world that measured value by pull-ups and ruck times, that made her invisible at best and a liability at worst. The reason she was even at FOB Kushamond was simple, and it had nothing to do with Captain Morrison's unit. A SEAL team operating out of Jalabad, SEAL Team 7, known for going after the hardest targets in the ugliest terrain, had requested her by name for an upcoming operation. Something complex. Something that required someone who understood the human landscape as well as the physical one. But there was a catch. Before she could embed with the SEAL element, she had to complete the FOB's standard training rotations. A bureaucratic formality. A box to check. Some staff officers' bright idea about joint readiness standards. It was becoming a professional nightmare. And the people watching her fail had no idea that the woman who couldn't climb a rope had talked armed insurgents into surrendering, had walked through villages that infantry units cleared with helicopter gunships, had carried secrets that could collapse operations spanning 3 provinces. They just saw someone who didn't belong. Over the next 2 weeks, the mockery stopped being casual and started becoming a campaign. Staff Sergeant Kyle Briggs led the charge. 3 deployments, a Purple Heart, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He started calling Maya Professor whenever she was within earshot, the word dripping with sarcasm, like it was the worst insult he could think of. During a tactical movement drill through a mock village setup, he'd said it loud enough for the whole formation to hear. Why are pencil pushers even required to do combat training? Army's going soft. Next thing you know, they'll be handing out participation trophies for land nav. Laughter. Always laughter. The kind that stuck to your skin. Other soldiers took their cue from Briggs. Maya got excluded from pre-drill briefs. Oh, sorry. Thought you knew the rally point. And somehow always ended up partnered with the weakest performers during buddy exercises. The private who couldn't shoot straight. The specialist who got winded walking to the DFAC. It ensured she stayed at the bottom of every ranking. Dead weight dragging down dead weight. The FOB rumor mill did the rest. She must be someone's diversity hire. Probably got her rank from a desk job at the Pentagon, never spent a day in the field. One sergeant swore he'd heard she'd failed Ranger School twice before washing out completely. Never mind that women weren't even allowed in Ranger School in 2012. Facts didn't matter. The narrative did. and the narrative said Maya Reeves was going to get someone killed if she ever ended up on a real mission. But the people telling that story weren't paying attention. During a vehicle inspection drill, Maya instinctively dropped to her knees and checked underneath the Humvee chassis first, before the engine, before the cabin. It was muscle memory, the kind of thing you learned when you'd seen enough vehicle-borne IEDs to know that's where the signatures hid. The instructor, a bod Motor sergeant, just nodded and moved on. No one else noticed. In a simulated village patrol exercise, the FOB's contracted Pashto translator, a local national with decent English but shaky dialect work, completely mangled a phrase while trying to explain the scenario. He'd used a formal greeting structure that would have been insulting in a rural context, the kind of mistake that could turn a friendly conversation hostile in the real world. Maya corrected him under her breath, her Pashto smooth and natural, the accent regional specific. The translator blinked, looked at her, then quietly adjusted. No one else was paying attention. They were too busy watching Briggs demonstrate proper clearing techniques with theatrical aggression. Private First Class Danny Chen, a quiet 22-year-old from the 10th Mountain Division, noticed something else. During PT one morning, he ended up next to Maya at the pull-up bar. She was struggling, again, and when she finally dropped off after 3 shaky representatives, he saw it. A small tattoo on her left forearm, faded black ink, 3 numbers, 739. Simple, deliberate. The kind of tattoo operators got to memorialize fallen teammates. He'd seen enough of them to recognize the style. He didn't ask about it. Something about the way she pulled her sleeve down told him not to. The days blurred together. More drills. More failures. More whispers. Maya stopped eating in the DFAC during peak hours, started showing up early or late to avoid the crowds. She didn't complain, didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She just endured it, like someone who'd learned a long time ago that explaining yourself to people who'd already decided you were worthless was a waste of breath. Most nights, after the training rotations were done and the FOB settled into its evening rhythm, Maya would slip into the Intelligence Operations Center, a plywood-walled room filled with computer terminals, maps, and the stale smell of energy drinks. She'd sit there alone, reviewing mission briefs for the SEAL team, cross-referencing tribal data, updating network maps. Her expression was unreadable. Focused. The kind of focus that came from knowing you were good at something, even when everyone around you thought you were useless. One night, Captain Morrison walked past the TOC window and saw her there, bathed in blue screen light, headphones on, annotating a targeting package with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He paused, frowned, kept walking. He didn't stop to ask what she was working on. Didn't ask why an analyst who couldn't finish an obstacle course was still putting in 12-hour days. He just kept walking, and Maya kept working, and the FOB kept believing the story it had already written about her. But the truth was sitting right there in that plywood room, waiting for someone to actually look. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in late August when Operation Cuppadagger went catastrophically wrong. The mission had launched 8 hours earlier, a joint SEAL-Afghan partner force-op targeting a high-value Taliban commander in the Peck River Valley, deep in Kuna province. The kind of terrain that had been killing Americans since 2001. Steep mountains, narrow valleys, villages that switched allegiances depending on who was holding the guns that week. The target was supposed to be at a specific compound, a mud brick structure in a village called Dawasgay. Signals intelligence had picked up cell chatter. Drone footage showed movement patterns. It looked solid, but it wasn't. Maya had flagged the intelligence package 3 days earlier. She'd written a dissenting assessment based on her own human source reporting and her understanding of tribal movement patterns in the region. The Taliban commander they were hunting, a man named Kari Hamza, had family ties in a completely different valley. The compound in Dawasgay belonged to a rival subclan. It didn't make sense. Her report was polite, professional, and clear. The targeting was questionable, and going in heavy would likely spook the network or worse. Her warning was noted in the file, then overridden. Signals intelligence beat human intelligence. Technology beat intuition. Officers trusted the drones and the cell intercepts over this soft assessment from an analyst who couldn't finish a rope climb. Now, at 0200 hours, the bill was coming due. The SEAL element had hit the compound and found it empty. Not abandoned, staged. Furniture positioned to look occupied. A fire pit still warm. And then the ambush had erupted from 3 sides. PKM machine gun fire raking the compound walls, RPGs lighting up the darkness, and an enemy quick reaction force moving in from the north to cut off their exfil route. The SEAL team was pinned in a valley they couldn't navigate in the dark, taking casualties, and their Afghan partner force interpreter had been hit in the first 30 seconds. Back at FOB Kushamond, the Tactical Operations Center exploded into controlled chaos. Radio chatter filled the room. Frantic, clipped, professional but edged with urgency. The operations officer was coordinating air support. The fire cell was trying to clear artillery. And the senior intelligence officer, the one who'd overridden Maya's assessment, was at a conference in Bagram, 200 miles away. The backup analyst, a lieutenant fresh out of the basic course, stood frozen at his workstation, staring at the map like it might explain itself. Then Lieutenant Commander James Harding's voice cut through the radio static. Harding was the SEAL Team's 7-element leader on the ground, a veteran of over 100 combat missions, the kind of operator who didn't panic and didn't waste words. Kushamond TOC, this is Spartan 6. I need a specific asset. Get me Reeves. Now. The TOC went silent for a beat. Colonel Marsh, the FOB commander, looked at Captain Morrison. Reeves? The intel analyst. She prepped the dissenting report. Morrison said, already reaching for the phone. She knows the area. Get her hey. 5 minutes ago. Someone sprinted out of the TOC toward the transient billeting area. 2 minutes later, Maya was being shaken awake in her bunk, still in PT shorts and an army t-shirt. No time to throw on a uniform. She pulled on boots without lacing them and ran. When she pushed through the TOC door, hair tangled, eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent light, the room was packed. Officers, NCOs, radio operators, drone feeds on every screen. And standing near the door, pulling security as part of the night shift detail, was Staff Sergeant Carl Briggs. He saw her, looked her up and down, exhausted, underdressed, out of breath. The smirk spread across his face slowly, like he'd just been handed a gift. This should be good, he muttered to the corporal next to him. Maya ignored him. She moved straight to the operations desk, where Colonel Marsh was waiting. He didn't waste time. Spartan 6 requested you personally. They are in the Peck Valley, grid November Delta 7348. Pinned down, interpreters down. They need exfil routes and local contacts. Can you help them? Maya looked at the map, saw the grid. Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Yes, sir. Put me on the net. The radio operator handed her the headset. The room watched her, some curious, some skeptical, Briggs still smirking near the door. She keyed the MIC, and when she spoke, her voice was different. Calm, steady, utterly transformed from the woman who'd failed every drill for 2 weeks. Spartan 6, this is Reeves. I have your position. What's your status? Harding's voice came back fast. We're combat ineffective for movement. Taking fire from north and east. Afghan Terp is down. We need a route out that doesn't put us in the kill zone. And we need to know which villages we can move through without getting lit up. I don't trust the map. Copy. Stand by. Maya closed her eyes for 2 seconds, then opened them and started speaking in Pashto. Fluid, fast, flawless. She wasn't talking to the SEAL team. She was talking to someone else. A local contact. A source. The words spilled out with the natural rhythm of a native speaker, regional dialect. The kind of Pashto you couldn't learn from a book. The room went dead quiet. Briggs stopped smirking. What happened over the next 40 minutes would become the kind of story people told in hushed voices at every FOB from Kandahar to Kabul. Maya didn't just translate. She took operational control of the entire civilian intelligence side of the rescue. She was back on the radio within seconds, speaking rapid-fire Dari now, a different dialect, talking to someone the room couldn't see. Her tone was calm but urgent, the voice of someone who'd done this before. She was negotiating, convincing, calling in a favor that had been years in the making. He'll do it, she said finally, switching back to English. Spartan 6, you've got a friendly local approximately 400 meters north of your position. Malik Aziz is sending his son with IR strobes to mark a safe route through the Wadi system. It'll bypass the enemy positions on the high ground. Harding's voice crackled back, tight with controlled adrenaline. How do you know this contact is reliable? Because I've known him since 2010, and he owes me his youngest daughter's life. Maya's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. You can trust him. Follow the strobes. She turned to the map, her finger tracing a dry wadi, a seasonal riverbed that snaked through the valley floor. There's a route here. The enemy won't have it covered because it floods during spring melt, and locals don't use it this time of year. But it's possible now. You'll come out near the village of Loe-Karlawi. How do you know the terrain? That was Colonel Marsh, standing behind her now, watching her work. Maya didn't look up. I've walked it. 2011, different up photographic memory helps. She keyed the radio again. Spartan 6, once you reach Loe-Karlawi, you'll need to pass through the village center. Do not deviate. Go straight to the compound with the blue door on the east side. That's Haji Gaffar's home. He's the Malik, the village elder. When you get there, your team leader needs to address him directly, use his title, and ask permission to pass through. Do not enter his courtyard. Do not let your Afghan partners go first. You speak to him, American to elder, show respect. He'll let you through. And if he doesn't? Harding asked. He will. But if he asks for chai, you accept. Don't rush. 2 minutes of tea will save you 20 minutes of fighting. She paused. And for God's sake, don't let anyone point a weapon at his sons. While she was doing this, coaching a SEAL team through cultural protocol that could mean the difference between safe passage and a firefight, she was simultaneously coordinating 3 other things. She tasked the Predator drone overhead to shift its focus to the northern ridgeline, identifying enemy movement patterns. She got on a separate radio net with the medevac birds staging out of Jalabad, giving them precise grid coordinates and updating casualty reports. And she worked with the fire cell to adjust artillery coordinates, making sure the support wouldn't hit the village or the exfil route. She did all of this standing in the middle of the TOC in PT shorts and unlaced boots, barefoot on the plywood floor, hair still tangled from sleep, her voice never rising above a controlled, professional calm. 30 people watched her in complete silence. Bridget stopped moving, stopped breathing, it looked like. His face had gone from smirking to blank to something that might have been dawning realization or shame. It was hard to tell in the blue light of the monitors. The minutes stretched. Radio updates came in short bursts. Moving through the wadi now. Strobes confirmed, we see them. Entering Loe-Karlawi. Then a longer pause, and Harding's voice again. We're at the blue door. Elders coming out. Maya keyed the MIC remember. Title. Respect. Ask permission. You're a guest in his village. Another pause. Then, is offering us chai. Accept it. Drink it. 2 minutes. Somewhere in the TOC, someone let out a breath they'd been holding. 4 minutes later, we're through the village. Link up with QRF in sight. Medevac inbound. And then, finally, Spartan 6 is secure. All personnel accounted for. Casualties stable. The TOC erupted in controlled relief. Quiet nods. Exhaled tension. The kind of subdued gratitude people showed when they knew it could have gone so much worse. Maya set the headset down carefully. Her hands were steady. She looked exhausted, but there was something else there too. Satisfaction, maybe, or just the quiet competence of someone who knew exactly what they were worth. Harding's voice came back over the radio one more time. Not operational traffic. Something else. Reeves, who the hell are you? She picked the headset back up. Sir, that source network, that terrain knowledge. I read your file before we requested you. But that file doesn't match what I just saw. Where'd you work before this? Maya hesitated, glanced at Colonel Marsh, who gave her a small nod. I've worked this valley before, sir. Different unit. Different mission set. Her voice was quiet, almost dismissive, like it didn't matter. Glad everyone's coming home. There was a pause on the other end. Then Harding asked one more question, And this one hit different. Where'd you earn that CIB? The room went dead quiet. Staff Sergeant Briggs looked confused. She was intel, not infantry. She shouldn't have a combat infantryman badge. Those were for grunts. For people who'd seen direct combat. Not analysts. Maya's voice, when it came, was flat. Emotionless in a way that meant the opposite. Didn't earn it, sir. It was awarded posthumously to someone I worked with. I just carry the reminder. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly, the woman who couldn't climb a rope had just revealed that she'd been carrying the weight of losses and missions that no one in this FOB had clearance to know about. That she'd walked valleys most of them would never see. That she'd built relationships with people whose names would never appear in any report. And those relationships had just saved American lives. And they'd spent 2 weeks mocking her for it. The days after Operation Copperdaga were quiet, but everything had shifted. Staff Sergeant Kyle Briggs didn't apologize. He didn't know how, and maybe that wasn't the point anyway. But he stopped talking, stopped smirking. When Maya walked past him in the TOC 2 days later, he gave her a single nod, brief, respectful, the kind of acknowledgement you gave someone who'd earned it. She nodded back. That was enough. Colonel Marsh personally pulled Maya's full classified service record. What he found made him set the folder down slowly and stare at the wall for a solid minute. Programs he didn't have clearance to fully understand. Assignments listed as various locations that he could read between the lines of. Commendations that were redacted except for the dates and the words exceptional performance under hostile conditions. He closed the file and never mentioned it again. Maya wasn't reassigned. Wasn't promoted. That's not how these stories end in the real military. There was no ceremony, no speech, no official recognition of what had happened that night. But she was no longer last in line. No longer invisible. When she walked into the DFAC during peak hours, junior enlisted moved aside to let her through. Not out of fear, out of respect. When she was back in the TOC reviewing targeting packages, people listened when she spoke. Her assessment stopped getting overridden. The whispers stopped entirely. 3 days later, a Chinook landed at FOB Kushamond and Maya packed her gear. The SEAL Team 7 element had formally requested her for embed. And this time there were no bureaucratic hoops to jump through. Lieutenant Commander Harding met her at the Halo, shook her hand, said 6 words, "Glad to have you on board." She threw her ruck onto the bird and climbed in. And just like that, she was gone. The FOB went back to its routines. Training exercises. Obstacle courses. The loud voices that always seemed to fill the space. But something had changed in the air, even if most people couldn't name it. Because the truth is, the loudest soldiers aren't always the strongest. The ones who fail the drills aren't always the ones who fail the mission. Some warriors carry their battles in languages you don't speak, in villages you've never heard of, and in scars you'll never see. They don't fit the mold. They don't look like what you expect. And if you judge them by the standards that matter least, you'll miss the fact that they're the ones holding everything together when it counts. Respect isn't earned on the obstacle course. It's earned when everything goes wrong. And the person you underestimated is the only reason everyone makes it home. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or judged by people who didn't know what you'd been through, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Share your story. Because quiet professionals don't always get the recognition they deserve, but they damn sure deserve to be heard.